Hey everyone, this is Mahi Sharma from Booknerds, and today on another episode of the Booknerds Hangout series, and on the occasion of World Lonely Day, I have the privilege to welcome Sandeep Mathew, sir, the author of the newly launched Gin Soaked Boy, a compelling and poignant read to delve into the intricacies of mental health. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
No worries at all, Mahi. I'm very glad to be here. Hope you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great.
So, to introduce you all to the author, Sandeep Mathew is a sales and marketing professional at Unilever, where he has worked for the last 15 years across Asia, Europe, and Africa. And in his spare time, he writes articles on marketing and vlogs about his travels. A real multi talented personality here with us, guys. And if you want to check out his work, it can be found on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Travel Blog. So, about the book, Gin Soaked Boy is about Raj, a former prodigy fueled by anxiety and depression, who begins to disappear under the dark shadow of alcoholism. And worse, no one close to him was able to discern that his issues ran deeper and darker than the bottle he held. Based on a true story, Gin Soaked Boy is a must read for anyone interested in understanding the elusive world of depression and its manifestations in the cultural context of a country like India. It's thus a memoir of one boy and the life he lived before his eventual capitulation to depression. Also, an interesting fact for our audience here, all the proceeds from the sale of the book will be directed to an NGO in India dedicated to imparting education and improving the mental health of underprivileged children. A truly thoughtful deed, sir, and it's an honor to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Mahi. That was very kind of you. Thanks.
So, I'll start with our questions. The first question to you, sir, is can you elaborate on the significance of the title, Gin Soaked Boy, and how it relates to the protagonist's journey?
Yeah, sure. So, the book's title, Jinstock Boy, is taken from a song of the same name. And the protagonist, Raj, in the book, is very loosely based on a person that I knew who also happened to like that song a lot. And as I went through the book, I began to realize that depression. I mean, the book is on depression, and I began to notice that many symptoms of depression doesn't come out that clearly, and people tend to mistake these symptoms sometimes for just carelessness or something else, and they don't directly link it to depression. And one of those symptoms, probably the most obvious of the symptoms, is alcoholism. When someone starts taking to alcohol and drinking a bit more than than the normal, you don't directly link it to depression. You just sometimes think of it as as just as a loose character, or just misbehaving, or just being careless, or things like that. But sometimes it can be linked to depression, and this was one of the symptoms that the protagonist went through, which was alcoholism. And hence I thought the name sticks because it's the most obvious symptom that we tend to overlook, uh, when it comes to alcoholism. Yeah.
That's such a great symbolism. And about the song lyrics that you mentioned, throughout the book, there are also different kind of songs that you have included in the diary entries of Raj. And that's honestly such an interesting take in the
Yeah.
narrative.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks.
moving on to the next. Okay. So, moving on to the next question. As a reader, we always want to know more about the literary gem that we hold in our hand, and are naturally curious about the challenges that shape the words on the pages. So, can you share the behind the scenes of how this book came into being, from the writing process to hitting the bookstores and being sold out in the UK and India? Congratulations for that, by the way.
Thanks. Uh, okay, so the writing process, actually, for me, it started quite easily, because writing for me is like a form of catharsis. When I'm feeling low and things like that, and when I write, I actually feel better about it. So ever since I was young, I've always had a journal. I've always written. It was a way for me to feel better about things. It was a way for me to manage my own emotions. So for this book in particular, because like I said, it was based on a friend of mine who went through depression, it started affecting me, and the way for me to deal with it was actually to write about it. and therefore it was actually quite easy for me to get started on writing. You tend to hear a lot of first time authors who say that getting started was the toughest, but for me that was actually quite easy. I started writing quite easily. However, what started to become a challenge was when I realized that I have so much of content written, and I wanted to start converting it into something which is a bit more useful, which is the final shape that the book took. Because if it was just my rambling, it wouldn't have become a book that would have been entertaining or even useful to read. So I needed to convert all of that into a very structured format, and that's where I started working with a lot of psychologists. Started trying to understand how I can structure the book a little better to make it a little more useful for people who are just trying to learn a bit more about depression. And that took a bit of time for me. In fact, if I have to just put it in actual timeline terms, I think I wrote the bulk of the content in 6 months, and then I spent the next 2 years actually refining it and editing it and putting it into a structure. uh, yeah, so that was the process, and finally once it came out, yeah, I was lucky enough to get a couple of reasonably famous people to talk about the book. One of them was Rajdeep Sardesai. He tweeted about the book. Then there were a couple of influencers who have a reasonable number of following, like 80 to 100,000 sort of following on Instagram, who spoke about it. And the thing was, it all happened very, very soon. I mean, just after the book was launched, in about 2 weeks' time, I think all of these happened, and I think that's why it ended up going out of stock. I do not know the algorithms that websites like Amazon and the others use, but it is possible that they have a certain quantity that is available, and then when they go out of sale, they just end up being sold out. So that's what happened. It ended up being sold out on these two websites. But yeah, that was just for a very short time. For about 2 days, there was no book available, but it came back soon after that. Yeah, so that was the whole writing process, and where the book went.
It's no doubt that the book was supposed to be a sold out. It was a really good read. And also the notion that, the first draft is always rubbish. I guess you're an exception to that.
No, I mean, I wouldn't say that. My first draft was definitely rubbish because, like I said, it was just my my rambling thoughts. I needed to convert it, and I think, yeah, it took a lot of time to get it into a good form. So I would agree that the first draft was definitely quite bad.
Okay, so on to the next question. Depression is a complex and multifaceted condition. How did you approach presenting such a nuanced topic in your book to ensure that readers can better understand and relate to it?
Yeah, so when I started speaking to a couple of psychologists, I began to realize that unlike other ailments, especially the ones that we are probably most clear about, which are like physical ailments, whether a fracture or even a fever, they can directly be correlated to a set of biomarkers or any specific instances that you can easily measure and then finally diagnose that there is an issue. But when it comes to depression, it's not that straightforward. It can manifest in many different ways, and like I said earlier, alcoholism is just one of them, but there can be many other ways in which it can manifest. And therefore, what many of these psychologists told me is that there is no set of symptoms that we can provide, and if you would like to talk about them, then you should talk about what you went through, and it would be as relevant as anybody else. So which is why I started writing about 12 symptoms that I noticed, which on its own may not seem like much. Like one symptom is just switching jobs. One symptom is just dissociating from close friends. And these on its own may not seem like much. If someone's going through this, you might just think, okay, that person is just not happy in his job, or he's just maybe exceptional at his job, and therefore switching from one good opportunity to another. There could be different reasons for this. However, I realize I need to talk about them and sort of start drawing a linkage to them, because if any of us were to witness someone displaying a, a couple of these symptoms, then we should ideally take it seriously, which is what, at least in my case, I didn't. I just dismiss it off as as something, as the person's silly behavior, while I should have been a little bit more serious about it. And that is what I aim to do with this book, and that's why I tried uncovering depression, try and give the reader a bit more clarity, and take a situation like this a lot more seriously, and you know intervene where required, and push the person who they suspect to be in depression to actually go out and seek help.
That is very thoughtful. And considering the post-COVID area, we are trying to check up more on our loved ones to see if they are doing okay.
Yeah, very true. Yes, the irony of this whole thing was this entire incident, at least for me, happened pre-COVID, and yes, you can imagine post-COVID this would have only aggravated. So I completely
Exactly.
agree with you. Yeah.
So, talking about the structure of the book, the writing the book in the format of 12 chapters, talking about various symptoms, is a very interesting take and helpful for individuals to discern it. How did this idea come forth?
Yeah, it happened through the various discussions that I had with experts. I spoke to some psychologists, like I said. I spoke to a couple of editors. I spoke to other authors. So by speaking to a lot of these experts, I started to the structure started to become a lot more clearer in my mind, and this was the shape that it finally took, which was to split the entire book in 12 chapters, where each chapter is focused on one symptom of depression. So every chapter that you read will actually kind of uncover that one aspect of depression. And the other thing that I did with the book was I wrote it as two acts. There's a first act which happens in the childhood of the protagonist, where he's nothing sort of a prodigy, and the second act is in his later years, where some of those things that happened in his younger years, which at that point of time you didn't take that seriously, but it actually was the inception. The issue started right there, and it started to manifest many years later, and obviously ended up taking such a serious turn that it went to a point of almost no return. So that's why I've structured the book. So I hope it is informative as well as entertaining for the reader when they read it in the structure it is in right now.
Yes, as you said, it is very helpful when individuals they try to, when loved ones they try to see that if any of the symptoms anybody might be showing. So that is helpful.
Yeah.
So, moving on to the next question, writing a novel is a journey of discovery for all of the writers. So, what was the most surprising or revealing aspect of depression that you discovered during your research and writing process that you believe people should be aware of?
Yeah, that depression, it is very gradual. There is no single big event after which point you can label that person as depressed. It is not that straightforward. It happens very gradually. There are some seeding incidents that probably happen at a younger age, that sort of lays the foundation, and from there there are a sequence of events that takes place over many years, and then after that you reach a point where the person is depressed and and seriously requires professional help. That's what I realized when it came to depression. A lot of us think, it's one. I mean, in fact, we hear a lot of celebrities when they talk about depression. You think, okay, one movie has gone bad, or they had one bad incident, and therefore they're depressed. It's not that straightforward. It actually takes place over many years. Exasperates very slowly. So I think that was the big insight I had, and which is what I tried explaining in the book as well.
So, depression is a manifestation of repressed emotions throughout your life.
Yes, yeah, over many years. Yeah.
So, on to the next question. While depression can be a very personal experience, it also has societal ramifications. In what ways does your book address the social, cultural, or environmental elements that contribute to depression?
Oh yeah, that's actually a very important question, because a lot of times we tend to think that depression only affects that one person who is depressed, but that's not really the case. It can have a lot of cascading effect. For example, I mean, as part of the research for my book, when I was talking to a few people, I can just take one example over here. There was a friend. I mean, there was a person that I spoke to, whose dad had passed away when he was quite young, and since he was very young when it happened, it didn't really affect him as much. It didn't really register for him as much. However, it affected his mother, and his mom went through depression for many years, and having to deal with it as he grew older, it started to affect him as well. and this is just one example I'm giving, and I'm sure anyone could empathize with this, but this could this could actually manifest in many other ways. In a business context, it can be even more serious. Someone who is in depression might end up making decisions that could be worse off for the team and even the business on its own. So therefore it can have a lot of consequences, and it's not just about the person who is suffering. And you're right, it can have a lot of ramifications, which is why we need to be very careful and try and address it as much as possible, not just for the person but for the people around as well.
Thank you for that, Sandeep sir. And the next question is: throughout the book, it felt like I felt so that Raj wasn't addressing the fact that he had depression and was perhaps not accepting of it. That maybe he was not okay, or I might say ignorance may be a better word. So, what advice would you offer readers who are in the same boat?
Oh, that is one of the biggest reasons why I wrote the book, because I think uh, acceptance of an issue is the biggest step, and once you've accepted, then the rest can follow quite easily. But I think the first step of just accepting that there is a problem is actually the biggest hurdle to overcome, and that was one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I'm hoping to leave people with slightly better understanding of this illness, so that when they notice these symptoms, they can actually be more proactive in the action that they take, and actually push people to really identify whether they have depression, and then get them to seek help. So yeah, I mean, I think that is where the character had, I mean, the protagonist that you mentioned, Raj, had a gap. He obviously did not come to terms with the fact that he was depressed, which is what I would assume. I mean, obviously, I don't know that many people. I'm not an expert, but I would assume most people who go through depression don't arrive at this acceptance soon enough, and that's the problem. Because just like any illness, the earlier we identify it and the earlier we treat it, the better your chances of recovery are.
So, what they say is true that acceptance is the hardest part of growing up and of our personal growth. So, a person who is not in their correct mental space needs to accept the fact that they are not okay.
Absolutely, yes.
Also, to all our audience here, guys, feel free to raise your hands and ask any questions that you may have. We have Janvi. Yeah, please go forward, Janvi.
Hi, sir.
Hi, Janvi.
Hi, sir. I have a question. So, after the publishing of the book, have you received any feedback from readers who have sort of related to the character in terms of depression or anxiety?
Uh, I have spoken to quite a few people who, I mean, it was, I didn't expect this kind of response actually, but quite a lot of people started opening up to me about issues. It wasn't specific to the character, but
Mm-hmm.
it was definitely related to the different symptoms that I have mentioned in the book. And I didn't expect that, because, like I said, I'm not an expert on this topic, so I really cannot help someone, at least from a professional point of view. I can only maybe lend a ear. That's it. But that was definitely a reaction I got. Quite a few people started reaching out to me, started sharing their stories, their struggles, and yeah, that was quite unexpected for me. That's not something I expected when I initially published the book.
That's amazing. So that's quite incredible. And like I think it's amazing because topics like depression and anxiety are not talked about a lot. And I feel like with your book, more people will be able to relate to it and will be able to sort of understand what depression and anxiety sort of feels like. So thank you so much for writing the book, sir.
Yeah, that really means a lot to me. Thank you so much. I know this book is just one drop in the depression ocean, but I just wanted to make my part in it. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess what matters is to know that you're not alone. There are people like you. So, thank you, sir. Your book may be a drop in the ocean, but it's like very significant for other people who may be
Yeah.
going through same things. So, next up we have Minakshi Girish. Yeah, Minakshi, go forward.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. Hi, sir. So, I am someone who has also been through depression and anxiety previously. And I have read a few books that talk about, depression, how to get over it, and sometimes it just feels very inaccurate what people are saying. Like, I have read one book called Finding Audrey by, I think, Sophie Kinsella, and it was very superficial, it was very fake and artificial what she was saying. It felt like this is not even what really happens here. So while approaching the portrayal of depression in your book, how did you ensure that it's accurate and sensitive to all the readers? Like, you kept it real but also kept the right amount of, dramatic elements to make it a good book.
Actually, yeah, thanks, Meenakshi, for that. Because you're right. One of the other reasons why I wrote the book was when I was going through it in terms of
Right.
facing, I mean, or interacting with the person who was going through depression. I started doing a lot of reading on my own, and I realized that we don't have too much literature in India. And maybe that is what you also experience, because when you read a lot
Right.
of these books, they come from a very Western context, and therefore the understanding of depression is very Western. And actually there is very limited literature that we have that kind of explains, or sort of decodes depression in an Indian context, which was the other reason why I wrote it, because I thought the book will actually sort of plug a gap that we have in the system. So you're right. I mean, it is an issue that we have right now. I don't know about it being inauthentic. It could just be that what you read was not very relevant to a very Indian kind of a context, because depression can manifest in a very different way for us back in India, and that's what I tried to explain in the book. And yeah, I think I managed to keep it real because it was based on very real incidents. So that kind of, because I'm actually talking about an individual who went through it, and I'm talking specifically about a symptom. So that's why I tried to keep it real as well.
Definitely. Thanks so much for the response, sir. Because, especially as you said, when I was reading the book about Western problems, it was like all the first world problems those people were talking about were not even relevant to us. It didn't
Yeah,
resonate with me. So,
yeah.
this book was more relatable as compared to that.
Oh, that
So,
yeah, that really feels good to hear, because that was definitely one of the reasons I was writing the book. So thanks so much for that
right.
feedback.
Sure, sir. Thanks so much. Thanks for the opportunity, guys.
Thank you so much, Minakshi and Janvi, for your questions. Our next question is actually related to what Minakshi said. How do you believe, sir, the cultural backdrop of India adds depth and complexity to the story's examination of depression? Were there any cultural nuances that influenced the characters' experiences?
Yeah, many actually, and like I mentioned earlier as well, a lot of these issues start from a young age, and then they sort of, they become a lot more serious as you grow older. And I think at a young age there are some very specific things that we tend to go through in India. The kind of pressure that parents put on us when it comes to studies, or the kind of expectation that they have, which can be in very indirect ways. It could be the way, in India parents don't really teach us in words, and you're almost expected to learn just from actions. There are many different things that we undergo back in India, from the way our parents are to the way society treats us. There are a lot of nuances, which is what I tried exploring through the eyes of the protagonist. But yeah, and I'm hoping it would be a little different from any typical literature that you get, which is usually based more on the Western world.
Kudos to you, sir, for handling such a sensitive topic with great detailing. So, what suggestions would you give aspiring writers who are interested in tackling such complex and challenging themes in their own works?
I think, I mean, definitely writing from personal context helps. If you've actually undergone something like this in such close terms like I did, that really helps, because then you're able to really dig deep, add a lot of emotion, or really bring it alive for the reader. So that definitely helps. But I would also understand that it cannot be the case for everyone. And I mean, even for me, if I were to now consider writing another book, I will definitely not come from a source of such close personal connection, and therefore, there would be other ways I would need to think about addressing it. But yeah, but at least one piece of advice that I can give from the experience I've gone through is this: that write as much as possible from your own personal experiences and personal stories. That will definitely, yeah, I mean, yeah, get the book out to be in a much better shape. Yeah.
That is true. Writing from personal experience makes a great narrative.
Yeah.
So, were there any creative challenges or writer's block while writing a novel, especially during pages which took an emotional toll on you? And how did you handle them?
Yeah, I mean, but again, just going right back to the start, for me, actually, that was it was actually the opposite for me. For me, writing actually helped. So anytime I was actually facing an issue, writing about it made me feel better. So it was actually a lot more easier for me to write, and I didn't really experience any writer's block. What I did experience was the rest of it. You know, the rest of the packaging and the creative elements, the from the title of the book to the book cover to the structure of the book. You know, the way the chapters should be constructed. All of those were really what ended up being a challenge for me. The main, you know, the fundamental content was actually quite easy, and I think that comes because of the personal connection. So I guess when you have that, it's a lot more easier to write. So yeah.
I guess budding writers need to meet you and you need to conduct a workshop for them on how to, do this.
That's nice to hear. Thanks.
So, how crucial are feedback and teamwork in the novel writing work environment? And how do you seek feedback from writers or writing groups? And how do you handle any subsequent criticism or rejection?
I think it's extremely important. You cannot take yourself too seriously when it comes to book writing at all. You need to be very, very humble and be very open to feedback. And I completely laid myself bare in this term. I asked feedback from pretty much anyone I could reach out to. I mean, even if they were not experts, I would still try to listen to what they had to say and try and incorporate as much of it as possible in the book. I mean, of course, I would then send it through a filtering process in my own thinking and reject some of the feedback which were probably not of any value. But I did try and seek help from as many sources as possible, and that's really important. I would definitely share that as advice for anyone who's writing the book. Just be very, very open and seek as much feedback as you can. Either go to the experts, like in my case I went to psychologists because I was talking about depression. Either that, or just go to, you know, publishers or editors or others who have just written books. Just talk to as many people as possible, and because all of them will be able to give you some piece of advice that helps in your book. And be open to all of them. And definitely, you know, don't take yourself too seriously. I mean, especially if you're just starting off as an author. I mean, there's no way you're going to be successful with your first book, right? So just be as humble as you can, and be completely open to this, to the feedback. And in some time, hopefully, you know, you'll get better and better, and hopefully one fine day you might end up, you know, having your own bestseller. But until that point, I think you should definitely be very humble and open to any feedback that comes your way.
That's such an interesting take on how to handle constructive criticism. So next up we have Shweta Rani for a question. Yeah, Shweta, go forward. Okay, we can't hear her. We'll wait for her to ask questions.
Hi
Before
Sandeep.
that,
Hi.
Hello, I can hear you now.
Hi guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Ron. Yeah,
Hi Sandeep. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Nice to meet you. All good,
Yes,
my friend.
same here. I couldn't resist, asking you a question which was like eating me up. I was hearing the conversation and it was very interesting and loved the book, by the way.
Ah,
And
thank you.
my question was that, I mean, I'm an introvert. Are introverts susceptible to such, going down the spiral, so as to say? Is that, can that happen more to introverts? Whatever you have talked about in the book, the depression, the slide, is that a possibility?
So, like I said, I'm not an expert. So please don't take my answer, you know, as anything with any kind of medical background or any of those things. I will just speak from personal experience. But I would tend to agree with you, and the only reason why I would agree with you is because when it comes to a mental illness, it is very difficult for an individual to kind of deal with it on their own. And I think that's a classic definition of an introvert, right? Somebody who sort of derives energy by being with themselves, versus an extrovert where they derive energy by being with others. And I think for emotional or mental ailments, you are only able to get that feedback when you kind of speak with others. Just by dealing with it yourself and just introspecting or reading things can sometimes end up having maybe even the opposite effect. At least that is what I noticed in the case of my friend who went through depression. He was an introvert and he would read a lot of literature, sometimes very depressing literature, like Russian authors and things, and that would actually only make it worse for him. So I would maybe agree with you that that introverts could be a bit more susceptible to this because they're trying to deal with it on their own, which is probably not the best way to manage. And extroverts, by virtue of getting feedback from others, are able to identify this issue a lot more quicker, and then take the next step, which is accepting that they have a problem, and then the next step, which is seeking out help. I think that entire journey is probably a bit more easier if you're an extrovert. I hope that answers, but like I said, I mean, please don't take this as any any sort of advice with medical background, because it's just my personal experience.
That makes sense, Sandeep. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rohan sir, for your question. And for our last question of this session, I would like to ask Sandeep sir about, are there any favorite book reads of this month or any author recommendations that you would like to give our audience?
Okay, so the current book I'm reading is a book called Outlive by a person called Dr. Peter Attia. I don't know how many of you guys would have heard about it, but I mean, so one of the things about me is I believe in holistic wellness, not just mental well-being, which is what the book is about, but even physical well-being. And this book talks a lot about I mean, your holistic wellness, but starting from the point of view of your physical wellness. So I would really recommend everyone to read this book. I think it has some very very fundamental things on that you should be doing to take care of your your overall health. And he talks about a concept called health span. Normally when we talk about health, we only talk about being healthy so that you can live as long as possible, which is typically just lifespan. But in this book, Dr. Attia, he doesn't talk about the concept of lifespan. He says living up to 90 or 100 doesn't really matter if for the last 40 years you're living handicapped. He says what really matters is something called health span, which is about living healthy for as many years as possible. And then he goes on to talk about the different things that you should be doing to ensure you're in your healthiest, for as long as you're alive. And some very very basic practices that you can start imbibing. Yeah, so that's the book that I'm currently reading, and I would definitely recommend it to everyone.
So, can I say you're more of a non-fiction books guy? That's interesting.
Yeah. I used to read a lot of fiction when I was young, but I think I'm too old now for fiction. So most of what I read now are actually non-fiction. A couple of fiction in between just for entertainment, but otherwise it's all non-fiction.
Okay, cool. So that brings us to the end of this wonderful and truly insightful session. I want to extend a heartfelt appreciation to Sandeep sir for being with us today and sharing his experiences as a writer. Your words have inspired and enlightened us. To the wonderful audience, thank you for your active participation and engaging questions. Your presence made this live session truly special. For those who want to stay connected with Sandeep sir and his work, don't forget to follow him on social media and go check out his blogs. Further, you can follow Teen Book Nerds on LinkedIn, Instagram, and other platforms to stay updated on more exciting events and book discussions. And don't forget to check out Gin Soaked Boy on Amazon. The link to the book is provided in the description of this event. Happy reading, and we look forward to connecting with you all again soon. Until then, take care, stay curious, and keep exploring the world of literature. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mahi. Thank you, everyone.